Welcome everyone. In this video, I want to talk about the Enlightenment, some of its definitions and goals, and then also focus a bit on politics and economics. There'll be a second video where we'll explore some additional things as well. First of all, also remember that you need to write more than just what comes across on the bullet points. What I'm talking about in between the bullet points is also material to write down. So let's talk about the Enlightenment. First of all, it's very difficult to put the Enlightenment in a specific framework, a specific years, because with intellectual movements, people disagree on who the first person in the movement was and who the last person. So historians really differ in the dates for the Enlightenment, but for this class, we're simply going to say it's primarily the 18th century, so the 1700s. Another important thing to keep in mind about the Enlightenment is that it's very influenced by the scientific revolution. Now, one of the problems with history is every time you try to discuss any event, you start going backwards to get the connections, and suddenly you're in ancient Greece. So we're not doing that here. But the scientific revolution helped the Enlightenment thinkers in the fact that the scientists who were working with this time period just before the Enlightenment we're realizing that there were actual laws that governed the way the universe worked. And so as people began to discover the laws of gravity and motion, the fact that human beings could understand the way the cosmos worked, people began to say, well, maybe there are rules to the way that human beings work. And so we begin to get the development of the social sciences, psychology, sociology, economics, political science, notice the science in politics, so that if we could begin to understand the rules and the laws that worked in these disciplines, then we would be able to create better societies. So this is often called the science of man, these social sciences that were to help us understand the rules to create these better societies. So that's really, the Enlightenment thinkers are really optimistic about where we can go in the future, that it should be possible to really improve society. Now, this is really a shift from what had come before, because part of what's happening here is the idea that we're going to use reason and science to create these societies, not that we're going to rely on religion to do so. So with our kind of continuing on these definitions and goals, education and reason are the real focus here. We can educate people, probably maybe mostly rich white men, in order to be able to understand these rules, and they could use their reason to create societies that function better. So we have faith in progress that's really based on human reason. In light of this and this kind of break from the past, some Enlightenment thinkers argued that human beings actually were basically good. They rejected traditional Christianity's arguments of the fall and sin, and said that things that appeared to be sin, these evils in society and things, were done because of the fact that people were acting irrationally. But again, we could educate people to behave in ways they should. Another aspect of this is the idea of inalienable rights. People have rights by virtue of being human beings. But what the Enlightenment thinkers did not agree on, and what would be a debate, and will be a debate through this whole course, is the issue of what are these rights? What are our inalienable rights? And who has them? Do women have these rights? Do minorities have these rights? Do children have these rights? Do all men have these rights? And the Enlightenment thinkers are going to disagree significantly about that. So keeping in mind those things, let's talk a little bit about politics, because that's one of the areas where we're going to begin to see significant change. And throughout this course, we're going to be discussing a number of different issues coming out of the Enlightenment. So if we can understand the best political systems in order to create good societies, what is the best political system? Now, one of the things that pretty much all Enlightenment thinkers believed was that power comes from the people. The rulers are not God ordained. They're not appointed by God. Power comes from the people in a social contract. And therefore, if that happens, if we grant power to the leaders, then we have the right to remove that power when a leader acts as a tyrant. So you can't just willy-nilly remove people from power. But if a leader is acting in a way that is unconscionable, that is like a tyrant, then you can remove him or her from power. Another thing that many people, many Enlightenment thinkers agreed on, and this comes out of Baron Montesquieu, you'll see his picture on the slide, is the idea that the way to avoid having a tyrant is to move away from absolutism, to move away from a system in which almost all power rests in the hands of one person, and instead to have separation of powers. This should sound relatively familiar. The idea that you should have an executive, a judiciary, and a legislature. And they work in different ways, and they check and balance each other. Now, this system could work both in a monarchy, so the executive could be a monarch, but the monarch would work with the Constitution and would have limits on his or her power. It could also work with a republic, where you would have a president. There's been a lot of influence of Montesquieu on the founders of the United States. Now, I do want to emphasize, however, that almost all Enlightenment thinkers did not think democracy was a good idea. They would have said that was the most ridiculous system in the world, because democracy puts tremendous trust on the average person to make good decisions, especially in choosing their leaders. Now, in the 18th century, most people are not very highly educated. Certainly most men, working class men, lower middle class men, don't have much of an education. So if you argue that human beings are rational and they need to be able to understand the rules in order to be able to make good decisions, that's not going to be the case for most people. So for the Enlightenment thinkers, they wouldn't have ever really imagined today's society. But they certainly would have said that democracy is a huge risk. So you want to rest the power in the hands of an educated elite who are very rational, and you also want to disperse power into different branches in order to ensure that no one person or no branch seizes power and begins to act in evil manner. Now, for economics, then, I want to just do a few principles here as well. The Enlightenment thinkers are not a monolith by any means, and so do pay attention that not everything I'm about to say would be agreed upon. But here are some big issues. First of all, you need to move away from government control of the economy. So the system that was in place in the 18th century is one in which the government really tried to control the economy through tariffs and taxes and other means. The Enlightenment thinkers said that's ridiculous. The system is going to work best when you just allow the economy to function naturally. These are these universal laws. And one of the problems with governments is they tend to mess up the laws. So we're going to move into laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire capitalism, hands off. The system is going to ultimately be the most prosperous when the government is not really playing around in it. Now, the government does have one rule, and that is to provide laws that protect private property so that you are not living in a society where your property can just be stolen. I suppose really there are two jobs for the government. The other job is to provide an atmosphere of peace, because people tend to buy more things when they're not running for their lives. Now, everybody then, or maybe just rich white men, should have the liberty to explore their own economic self-interests. Where do I want to invest in the market? What kind of business do I want to have? Let's do supply and demand. If a product is more in demand, it's going to cost more than a product that's not. You shouldn't have prices set by the government. That just messes up the system significantly. So we're going to have a system in which my economic self-interest is actually going to end up for the good for everyone. And basically that's going to happen, the argument, Adam Smith makes this argument, that once we recognize that we are all connected through trade and commerce, most likely we will begin to not see as many wars. Because I should be reasonable enough to know that if we trigger off a war, instead of negotiating to some sort of agreement that we are going to both prosper in, then we're going to mess up the economy. All of the destruction, all of the costs of war are going to cause real significant problems. So, by moving towards laissez faire capitalism, a system in which the rules work, the natural rules of the economy just function the way they should, not only should you begin to see a much more prosperous economy in which you have less people who are poor. But on top of that, you should move away from the violence that society has experienced, because this is just a reasonable outcome of a successful economy.